Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I see lots of folks still joining through participants, but I want to make sure that we keep things on track and on time today, given a lot of the content that we have to cover. So first and foremost, thank you so much for being here. My name is Dana O'Born, and I am the Vice President of Strategy and Advocacy and your host for today's webinar. We're going to be spending the next 45 minutes or so talking about all of the budgets that have come out across all the different provinces, and of course, the federal budget that came out this week. And we reserve time for the back end of this conversation for some Q&A between my colleagues who are joined on the line today and from all of you. So before we get rolling today, I just want to introduce my colleagues and today's presenters. You can see all of their beautiful faces and headshots here and their names, but we've got our President Benjamin Bergen, our Director of Federal Affairs, Nick, Abu, who will be taking us through BC, Jess, who will be taking us through the prairies, Skydra from Ontario, JF from Quebec, and our Atlantic region will be covered by my colleague Karen. Before we move to the next slide, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. So first and foremost, the Q&A function is open. Please be respectful. We will be taking some of those questions and answering them in real time through my colleague Laurent Carbonneau, who is also lurking in the shadows and making sure that all of the questions get answered. If a question seems to reoccur several times, we're going to take that into the Q&A portion of the discussion and have that open answered live. All of you have been placed on mute upon entry. There's a big number of folks on the line today, and so we just want to make sure that there are no distractions and making it as easy as possible for everybody to move through this nice and smoothly. The call is being recorded. Just for your awareness, it's important that we share that information in advance. And the presentation that we are going to go through today will be shared with everybody who has registered for this call today and followed up in an email later on this afternoon. So without further ado, we'll move to the next slide. And just a few comments here on table setting before we get into this. If this is your first time joining a Council of Canadian Innovators webinar, thank you for being here again and welcome. Since 2015, our mission has really been to champion Canadian headquartered technology companies. And so we work with companies from across the country and CEOs and innovators and leaders that have been building their teams, building their companies from the ground up, and really drive home the need to have those folks at the table as we're making policy decisions for our country and our provinces. A big part of what we talk about is around our advocacy. And so we sort of set things up in four main buckets around access to talent, access to capital, access to customers, and freedom to operate in the marketplace and marketplace frameworks. And we listed a few of our accomplishments and goals here. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see a number of reports that CCI has recently put out. One of those reports will probably have a thread through all of our presentations this afternoon around procurement. It is what we have coined the year of procurement, a big piece of public policy that we have catalyzed across the country to get people talking and thinking about how to drive economic development through public policy vis-a-vis procurement. So you get to see me in two forms here. One as a photo. My hair is a little bit different, so got a little bit gussied up for all of you today. Just kidding. But if you are interested in learning more about the advocacy and the work that we do that is not discussed on the call today, because we are very much focusing on a specific element around our budget. We also do run an adjacent program called the Innovation Governance Program, which I'm sure many of you who are joining us today have taken either level 1, 2, or 3, or all. If you have not and you're more interested, please reach out. Any of our advocacy initiatives, we are an open book. All of our email addresses are available on our website, and my information is here, and we will be offering all of those email addresses to all of my colleagues who are going to be taking the baton from here. So without further ado, and making sure I stay on time here, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague and CCI's president of the Council of Canadian Innovators, Benjamin Bergen. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks for keeping us on time. Hi, folks. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Benjamin Bergen. I'm the president of the Council of Canadian Innovators. And I think it's fair to say over the last 24 hours since the federal budget has been announced, we've had to change some of our regular programming in terms of what we were planning today and what we were planning on speaking about. And we've received a tremendous amount of interest and candidly concern about what the federal government has really announced over the last 24 hours. and what it means for not just innovators, but also for Canada and for Canada's future. We've seen, in terms of the country, a stagnation around real wages. We've seen stagnation around the country's growth. And candidly, Canada's competitiveness globally has diminished. And what we're seeing from the federal government in terms of their announcement over the last couple of days has been to place the economic challenges that the country has on the feet of some of the most productive members of the economy. And this isn't impacting just those in the tech sector, right? This has implications for those who start a plumbing business, those who are electricians and build their own company, those who own a rental property in PEI and rent it out for the summer. And so the government is trying to make this debate emotional. They're trying to move it towards a narrative where it's the 1% who will be paying for really the mismanagement of the economy. And the focus here should be really around how do we actually grow Canada's economy? How do we actually collaboratively come together? And rather than be punitive towards innovators to pay for the program, that we actually look at ways of moving forward. And so we at the Council of Canadian Innovators have been looking for, obviously, policies that are able to actually create wealth and prosperity and that can actually begin to reverse some of the challenges that we've seen. As an example, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada about 6 weeks ago warned that Canada's productivity is spiraling, that we are a nation that is really struggling, and even made the indicator that we need to break the glass in terms of figuring out how to adjust our public policy frameworks in order to create wealth and prosperity. And so the government's comments and policy around this new capital gains taxation flies in the face of the recommendations that the that the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada put forward, that we actually need to be increasing our spending in investments and need to be increasing the amount of capital that we're putting to work for businesses. And so by framing it in this way and by putting forward this policy, the government is actually making it more difficult for us as a country to pay for the social programs that we care about in the long run around how we fund that future. And so we at the council are obviously supported by our members, and what animates us is what they tell us. And the comments that have been coming in from CEOs and from leaders has been concerning. Just to quote a couple of them, my phone was sort of immediately blowing up once the budget came out about concerns about what this meant. So I have a quote from a CEO in Toronto saying, "We are struggling to justify staying in Canada to our investors." I had another CEO from British Columbia reach out and say, "This is a disaster. What it signals for everyone is bad, especially for the tech sector." And I had another founder reach out and say, "I've been having a debate with my counterpart about leaving the country. This makes that debate a lot easier for them to win." And I've had folks in the investment community reach out and say, "We have two founders that are looking at raising a Series A, but are now focusing on relocating to the US where there's a better climate for opportunity." So I think what we as the business community and really as some of the most productive people that are trying to grow Canada and grow the economy need to view this really as unacceptable. We need to view the vilifying of productivity as something that we should be really concerned about and something that we need to take action. And so that's what we've done at the council. Over the last 24 hours, we put out a call for action for people to sign a letter. I think that's probably how a lot of you have been connected with us. You probably saw what we put out on LinkedIn and social media. So if you haven't signed that letter, please do it now. In order for us to really speak with one voice and for us to be able to push back really against this narrative that the government is trying to create and trying to divide us as Canadians. We need folks coming together to help understand and explain it. So if you signed the letter, thank you. But if you haven't, please do. Over the last 24 hours, we've been having conversations with, as I mentioned, the federal government on how to either try and reverse this decision or to find amendments to make it better. Those conversations will obviously be continuing. We had the council issued a request to speak with Minister Freeland, and have actually just received confirmation that we most likely will speak with her tomorrow in Toronto with a small group of leaders to try and explain to her how disastrous the consequences of this are. And so I think, it's important to realize that it is the government that has put us in this situation. They intentionally did not engage with the business community to try and explain or to try and talk about what capital gains would mean for the economy. This was a decision by the government to try and keep folks disorganized and to try and create this tension between really different groups within Canada and to try and frame it as an us and them type of debate. And so I think as we continue to move forward, as we continue to think about how we want to try and challenge the concerns that we're really seeing here, we've got to do it in a way that is positive, that talks about how we can create productivity and prosperity together, and that really the way out of this challenge and this issue that we as a country are facing is not to divide and to tax, but is actually to grow our economy, to actually listen to experts, to actually listen to the folks that are creating wealth and prosperity, so that we'll be able to pay for the social programs that we care about. That's why what's being put forward is so concerning, is that it is a lack of an understanding of how prosperity is created, where you don't properly incentivize folks who are willing to take risk. And the result ultimately at the end of the day is an economy that is going to continue to stagnate. So there will be more to come in the next 24 hours as things continue to progress. But I thank you all for joining us today, specifically on the capital gains piece, and for really wanting to begin to organize for victory on this. And it really will be in all of us linking arms, being able to communicate to the government not only potential issues and challenges with what it means, but also look at how we can provide solutions. And so that is, kind of the overarching message around themes and narrative. I definitely went over time, Dana, so my apologies on that front. But I do want to, just emphasize sort of my kind of final message that we at the council really, have spent the last almost decade putting forward solutions and ideas for the government on how to collaborate and how to work together. And the last 24 hours from the federal government has been an indication that they haven't been wanting to do that. And so we've got to get back to figuring out how we can be collaborative, how we can work together, and how we can actually begin to solve some of the greatest challenges that we have here in Canada around concerns about productivity, about prosperity, and about wealth creation. And in doing that, we'll be able to be more successful as a country. So I think we've already moved on to the federal budget recap, where Nick's going to go and delve into a little bit more of the items that were in the federal budget. But we will be sticking around to do a bit of a Q&A and talk about some of the deeper questions and some of the strategy. So Nick, I'll pass it over to you and go from there.
Thanks, Benjamin. And I just want to echo what you said to acknowledge that in the last couple of days, we have heard a lot of frustration, concern, and fear for the future of entrepreneurship in our country. And so as we navigate this, I'd love to hear from you with your questions, your concerns, and even your experiences, not just at the end of this session, but in the days and the weeks to come. Putting that aside for now, I do want to speak to some of the other facets of the federal budget and movement on some advocacy priorities that matter to innovators like you. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that this movement is the direct result of our member-driven advocacy. It is because of CEOs like you, it is because of leaders like you who continue to speak out, who continue to act for a more productive, a more competitive, a more innovative economy that we are where we are. And so on behalf of the entire advocacy team, I just want to say thank you for making our job a little bit easier. And with that, we will dive in as there is quite a bit to discuss. So in budget 2024, the government's committed to $53 billion in new spending with a clear focus on trying to address the cost of living, affordability, and rising generational inequality. So some of the big winners in this budget are housing, education, pharmacare, as well as defense. This is a pre-election budget with a focus on the demographics that the Liberals are looking to court. And so many were surprised at the scale of the budget considering the fiscal landscape. Moving into some of the specifics now, let's start with the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit, or SR&ED. As you know, this has been a foundational issue for CCI for nearly a decade, alongside our advocacy for a patent box. In budget 2022, we got the government to commit to a review of this program, and the consultation period for this review ended a few days ago. So again, a big thank you to each and every one of you who participated in this. In addition to our comprehensive report on SR&ED, our team has been engaging with public servants, with officials across the aisle, with the media, and with the ecosystem to see a truly 21st century program that's more efficient, that's more transparent, and that meets the realities of a modern business. So we're eager to see this review wrap up this spring and learn more about where this new funding is going to be used to enhance the program. As Ben mentioned, and as part of our year of procurement, and as a direct ask from our recent procurement report, Buying Ideas, the government has signaled its intention to legislate minimum targets for federal procurement that come from small and medium-sized enterprises and innovative firms. So we are eager to leverage our official partnership with PSPC and with Procurement Assistance Canada to ensure that members like you are engaged in this process, and we'll of course keep you updated along the way. On the IP front, we saw two updates that can support, the intellectual property ecosystem here in Canada. The first is a new business write-off for companies looking to write off investments in patents, data network infrastructure equipment, and computers. And the second is renewed funding for the Innovation Asset Collective, Canada's foremost clean tech IP organization. While both of these are positive signals, we need more details, and we know that there is more to do to generate, protect, and commercialize IP in Canada. As was previously announced, the government's new $2.4 billion investment in AI infrastructure can be a huge boost for innovators, but I will say that at this stage, we're left with more questions than answers. Last summer, in our Roadmap for Responsible AI Leadership, we called on the government to focus on ensuring that Canada's AI landscape is safe, but also flexible, agile, and places the emphasis on scaling firms. And so that's exactly what we're going to do with this funding. In the coming months, we know that there will be industry consultation, and we'll make sure that CCI members are at the table as this new funding starts to be allocated. Moving over to our FinTech members, in the budget, we saw movement on Canada's consumer-driven banking framework, very much in line with CCI's pre-budget recommendations. As we go forward, one of our main goals is to ensure that the soon-to-be-created Senior Deputy Commissioner of Consumer-Driven Banking at the FCAC has a specific mandate to increase competition and spur innovation for Canadians. It's critical that we have a made-in-Canada system that is safe, of course, but we also need more choice for Canadians, and we need more innovation from our FinTech firms. So that's a very big priority for us right now. And then I also just wanted to give a shout out to my colleague and Director of Communications, James McLeod, because I'm quite proud of how far we've come from our open letter advocacy campaign on open banking last fall, a campaign that many of you signed on to and shared. So once again, thank you for your advocacy. Shifting to defense and cyber, as was previously announced, the government has allocated a lot of new spending to its new defense policy in an attempt to move closer to our 2% of GDP spending commitment under NATO. While this policy doesn't get Canada quite there, it is a significant increase, and it does offer some interesting opportunities for innovators and for defense procurement. The review also acknowledges the importance of emerging technological fields, including AI, quantum, biotech, and cyber, as well as the importance of IP. So I was pleased to see that. Sticking with cyber, Budget 2024 also announced the Treasury Board's intention to establish a whole-of-government cyber strategy. It remains unclear to me where this fits within the delayed national cybersecurity strategy, but as always, our focus is on ensuring that cyber innovators are working in lockstep with the government to get it right. So we will be following up with the Treasury Board in the days to come. Moving now to some more regulatory changes, we are expecting a new directive for crown corporations like EDC and BDC to offer more financing to innovative firms and combat the risk aversion that too often permeates these organizations. This is something I hear very often from entrepreneurs, and right now, with capital being squeezed, I'm pleased to see this much needed change. We also saw a commitment to amend legislation to allow for regulatory sandboxes across government. And fundamentally, this means that it will be easier for novel technology to be tested and regulated at a competitive speed alongside government. Finally, and I know there's been a lot of ground to cover here, I just want to make a note that the post-secondary education, and in particular science and research, was one of the big winners in this budget. As you can see on the slide, there were some significant upgrades for scholarships for master's and doctoral students, which could help relieve some of the pressure on our tech talent crunch and improve that tech talent pipeline. At the same time, the government has also signaled it wants to develop a national science and innovation strategy with the help of an advisory council on science and innovation. Commitments like this are good, don't get me wrong, but the key is very much in the execution. So we are going to make sure that both the council and the forthcoming strategy really represent Canada's domestic scaling tech firms and place an emphasis where it should be, on IP, on commercialization, and on global growth. So a lot to digest from the federal budget, but very keen for your questions and the discussion to come. With that, I will pass things over to my colleague Abu, CCI's Director of Strategic Initiatives, for his analysis of the 2024 BC budget. Abu, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Just jumping out west, this year's BC budget was really a reflection of the challenging economic climate we're in. There was a projected deficit of nearly $8 billion, which is double that of last year. So for 2024, the government in BC is really focused on supporting crucial areas like healthcare, education, housing, and families. One notable update for the business community is the increase in the employer health tax threshold from $500,000 to $1 million, which now exempts 90% of businesses and saves approximately $100 million annually. Turning to healthcare, an additional $2 billion has been earmarked for new investments in the public healthcare system to support people's access to critical services. And this includes $270 million for cancer care as part of the government's 10-year cancer strategy, and $215 million to bolster mental health and addiction services and access to those services. Infrastructure also gets a significant boost in this budget, with $14 billion invested towards roads, schools, and healthcare facilities. And in the housing market, the government has introduced a flipping tax aimed to address speculative buying and selling in the province, which, for those of you who live there, has been a long-term problem. The tax is set for 20% for properties sold within a year of purchase and then tapers to 0 after 2 years. There's also really promising news for families and first-time home buyers. The BC Family Benefit will increase by 25% for 1 year, and the threshold for first-time home buyers program has been raised as well to help new buyers navigate and enter this really competitive market. So overall, from our perspective and from CCI members' perspective, this is definitely not an innovation budget out in BC. With BC voters heading to the polls later this year, this is a budget that's really focused on improving cost of living and addressing those challenges that the residents are facing. However, I do want to flag that there are some really great ongoing initiatives being taken by the BC government on the innovation front, particularly from the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, or JEDI. So you can go to the next slide. First, we have a provincial IP strategy that was launched last June, and that's something CCI has been championing for years. This initiative is really crucial for leveraging the IP created in BC and ensuring that innovations actually translate to local and global benefits and create wealth. The strategy's first phase, which is being delivered right now, focuses on enhancing IP literacy through education and capacity building. And the second phase, which is up and coming, will be focused more on developing policy structures and programs that actively incentivize companies to commercialize their intangible assets. So we're really enthusiastic about collaborating with the government on this throughout the coming year. The next is the Integrated Marketplace Initiative led by Innovate BC, which accelerates and de-risks the adoption of domestic innovation. I know we spoke about procurement a lot. It's a really big focus. So we're a huge proponent of, as this is a barrier to entry for firms in this space. So through this initiative, the government really collaborates directly with industry through the function of test beds and enables them to explore new technologies and reduce costs in a timely way that affects and enhances competitiveness. We're also really pleased with the continued investments by NBC, the province's strategic investment fund that was set up a few years back. This fund has an amazing mandate to invest in local companies that directly impact the province and has successfully delivered funding to several tech firms, including a CCI member, over the past year. So we're really eager to see how these investments unfold and looking forward to more like these in 2024. Finally, we are also keeping a close eye on the implementation of BC's life sciences and biomanufacturing strategy. This was a key component of BC's Stronger BC Economic Plan, and it outlines key actions to maximize our competitive edge in this sector as it relates to attracting highly skilled talent, investment, innovation, and creating anchor companies in the province. So as this continues to roll out, we'll be monitoring these specific developments really closely. So overall, this budget didn't heavily focus on tech, but these ongoing initiatives are happening, and they represent quite a significant commitment by the government to create a more innovative and integrated tech ecosystem there. So there's a lot of opportunity that CCI will be engaging going forward. I look forward to any questions, but I'll now pass it on to my colleague Jess for the prairies. Thank you so much.
Hi, folks. So moving from west to east, like the snow pattern we've all been enjoying in the prairie provinces, we're going to start with Alberta. Alberta is messaging its budget as a responsible plan for a growing province, which, translating that politically is a bit of an exercise in belt tightening. So much like BC's, this is not an especially innovation-focused budget. The province is heavily focusing on cybersecurity, data, and digitization of government, with $7.5 million to implement a data strategy and $45 million to the Digital Accelerator Program to provide better online services for Albertans. And if you look at the government's language around this line item, it offers a bit of insight into their future planning work on the recently announced Alberta Digital Management Framework. So CCI has contributed to the sort of first phase of consultations on that item, and we're eager to hear more from government on how that will unfold. At this point, procurement opportunities for domestic companies are a bit opaque in this space and in cybersecurity. But we've asked Minister Glubish last week when we met with him and Premier Smith to keep us updated about opportunities for domestic companies. So in addition, the government is spending $45 million to maintain and upgrade cybersecurity measures. Government has recently partnered with a US-based firm called Fortinet to stand up a cybersecurity center of excellence in Calgary. The bulk of the cash was provided by the company, so this isn't a huge spend on government's part. I believe it was $3 million from the province, but the unknown factor is where the IP developed there will eventually be commercialized, and where the items will be patented that are developed there. So some questions left unanswered. Government has allocated an additional $5 million to support Alberta tech scale-ups. So again, definitely not an innovation budget. Government did a lot of pre-positioning about the fact that commodity prices had softened a little bit, and so it wouldn't be a spendy budget, but there are some opportunities likely arising in cybersecurity, and we are very eager to hear about the government's new data strategy and how it will impact businesses, particularly in the credentialing and AI and machine learning spaces. So moving on to Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan's 2024 budget the province is going to see a $273 million deficit as compares with the $1 billion surplus of last year. So again, a bit of an exercise in belt tightening in the province's quote unquote classrooms, care, and communities budget. Saskatchewan is generally very focused on tax incentives in terms of shoring up support for domestic innovators. So they've enhanced the Saskatchewan Technology Startup Incentive, or STSI program. So they've doubled the program cap to 7 million, so not a huge spend there. But they've expanded the program to startups. It's interesting that startups weren't included in the programming to begin with, but there we are. The province is also focusing on supporting IP commercialization, which we're very pleased with through extending the Saskatchewan Commercial Innovation Incentive tax break program. Historically, this program has really favored the sort of ag and energy spaces. So we're hoping to see some like a more variety of companies apply for the program in the future. Saskatchewan also has historically been a great partner to Prairies Can in terms of partnering on programming, specifically in the talent area. And I know that a lot of our member companies have utilized that avenue of funding in the past. But like so many things in the province, it's not well advertised. So that's definitely something to look at if you're looking at bringing new talent on over the next year. Manitoba, as we all know, is in a bit of a tough situation fiscally, like the other prairie provinces, and so they've focused a lot on affordability, healthcare, and education, much like Saskatchewan. The province has allocated some interesting funding to health innovation. And I think that this really speaks to the recognition by government, specifically in health, that rural communities are struggling to access healthcare. So I think that there are going to be some very interesting initiatives spearheaded through the Health System Innovation Capacity Fund in that area, in the area specifically of rural healthcare, diagnostics, and a new approach to a provision of services. The province, notably, has also stood up $50 million for Provincial Strategic Innovation Fund. This is nothing to sniff at. $50 million is a lot of money in the province of Manitoba. And this represents, thanks to my colleague Laurent for pointing this out, this represents a bigger spend than the federal government has allocated to date in that province through their own ISED strategic fund. So this is absolutely a bit of a visionary budget for Manitoba in terms of tech, particularly when you consider the fiscal situation in the province. So lots of interesting things happening there, and we'll be watching closely. I would like to now pass the torch on to Skyder Prudionis, who is my colleague in Ontario, to give her thoughts on the Ontario budget.
Thanks so much, Jess, and welcome everyone. So just under a month ago on March 16th, Ontario's Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy delivered the province's 2024 budget, Building a Better Ontario. Noting up top that this government is also running a significant deficit, bringing it to $9.8 billion on a total of $214 billion in spending. Minister Bethlenfalvy did emphasize that the government is choosing not to raise taxes and continuing investing in future growth. But what does that really look like? So there was a significant focus on healthcare, infrastructure, and municipal spending. On the innovation front, we did see something novel, a $12 million program called the Health Technology Accelerator Fund, something that we've really been pushing through our advocacy as well, which is really intended to help healthcare providers buy and use innovative tools and services, including from Ontario-based companies. A few other notable tidbits when thinking about the innovation context. We saw $5 million to explore the use of digital twins in Ontario infrastructure through an initiative in partnership with Toronto Metropolitan University. We also saw $18 million over 3 years to support the ongoing operation of Ontario's advanced research computing facilities, along with over $47 million for infrastructure refresh of supercomputers at the University of Toronto and the University of Waterloo. We also saw an additional $100 million for Invest Ontario, a relatively new agency spun out of the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade to support economic development initiatives. Of course, we always are pushing for the investment in Ontario's domestic and headquartered companies. And we also are now seeing a new regional innovation center on top of the already 17 regional innovation centers that exist across the province being spun up in Barrie, Ontario. Not much on the KPIs or how this will unfold. We'll be watching closely. We also saw an additional $100 million for the Skills Development Fund training stream to address challenges in hiring, training, and retaining workers. And we saw really an attempt to really address the growing labor market demand for workers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The government has also allocated one-time funding in this 2023 and 2024 period. So ultimately, what we're looking at more closely in our year of procurement as we do a deeper dive, and I want to take a moment just to look more deeply at this Health Technology Accelerator Fund. We're really optimistic about this because really the most common means of funding and the adoption of new technologies in healthcare in Ontario and really many governments are either through fundraising or one-time government funding. So what this does is actually create a problem for both entrepreneurs and healthcare providers because neither approach is permanent or scalable. It results in high impact innovations being trapped in a cycle of never-ending pilot programs. So we're really optimistic that while this $12 million is a droplet in a sea when it comes to healthcare spending, it does create a new opportunity, a new lever, a new mechanism to sort of bring innovation into healthcare ecosystem. And finally, when we're thinking about Supply Ontario, an agency that's been set up to really create a one window and a centralized approach to procurement in the province, they're working closely with the Building Ontario Business Initiative, Bobby. This actually came into effect on April 1st, and this is actually new regulation in Ontario's public sector, really encouraging the public sector, this includes hospitals, schools, colleges, and universities, to actually prefer Ontario businesses when conducting procurements for goods and services. The sum that it applies to is still relatively low, but that said, it's a positive narrative, it's a positive push for the domestic community for really preferring and giving a fighting chance and leveling the playing field for Ontario-based companies. So we're optimistic. I'm now going to pass it over to Jean JF, my colleague in Quebec, to give us a rundown of Quebec's budget.
Thank you, Skydra. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. So this budget, the Quebec's 2024 budget was similar to a lot of budgets across the country. So very prudent, somewhat conservative, big priority on education, healthcare, housing, day-to-day priorities. So not an innovation budget. The budget posted the biggest deficit in Quebec's history. It's close to $11 billion. But on the positive side, even as this government was facing headwinds, that hasn't been an easy past couple of months for this government in Quebec, they still managed to keep their eyes on the ball and address very important regulatory change. So the main thing for us was the organization of the tech sector tax credit. It's something we've advocated for ever since we started doing advocacy work in Quebec. So they're essentially, to do a quick summary, there are 3 tax credits for tech in Quebec, one for the video game industry, one for multimedia, and the third one, which encompasses the rest of the industry pretty much. So historically, the video game tax credit has been much more generous than the other 2, which effectively helped the video game industry offer higher wages and better working conditions to workers who they usually, in a lot of cases, compete with the rest of the tech industry to hire. So this effectively created inequity in the tech sector, and we're very happy to see the 3 tax credits being harmonized, which will create more equity in the sector. Even though the way it's been harmonized leaves some things to be desired, it's still a step in the right direction. Additional money to help companies adjust to new French language requirement. You see the number on there, big number. Ever since the government unveiled Bill 96, now known as Law 14, we've been on the record asking them to reconsider certain aspects of Law 14, as many of those new requirements create unnecessary hardships for innovators in Quebec, especially on the regulatory side. So as an organization, one thing I need to mention, we fully support and understand the importance for Quebec to protect French language and promote it. But we believe there is a way to strengthen both the French language and the economy, and we don't believe Law 14 has done a great job at that. So one of our main asks always has been for the government to make sure they provide the necessary resources for businesses to adjust to the new requirements and lessen its impact on their activities, like training of employees, if they need to change internal processes, etc. So we're very glad to see that there's money being spent in that area. But we don't have a lot of details as to how this will all unfold. So even though we're glad to see that the government recognizes that the businesses need help to adjust, we'll be following how this money will be spent, where it will be going in the next few months. Because as always, when it comes to public policy, devils is in the detail. There's also a huge investment up to $500 million to support Quebec talent pipeline and the higher education system. So details are still very granular here, but what we've seen in the budget is that this money will go towards promoting the success and retention of university students, with the goal to help universities strengthen the support and services that promote the attraction, the success, and retention of their future graduates. And the money would also help them in their efforts to develop the French language skills of non-Quebec students, notably through adapted French learning. And there's also a small portion of this money that will go towards student housing. So all great news, but again, devil is in the details. So we're very eager to learn more about the rollout of all these measures, especially the timelines, since the needs are vast and additional resources are necessary right now. Minister Girard also announced a review of Quebec's fiscal policies. So this is great news. We believe this is a great opportunity for us to engage with the government regarding their policies on stock option, for example, and also to make sure they don't follow in the federal government footsteps and raise the tax on capital gains, as it's been rumored in the past couple of days. And finally, one quick word on procurement. Given 2024 is the year of procurement, we were disappointed to not see any news, any announcement in this past budget about procurement in Quebec, especially since the government itself has said that it's a priority for them to increase local procurement and better support Quebec companies. So this will be one of the main focus of our advocacy in Quebec in the coming months. So I just want to say before I turn it over to my colleague Karen Moore that if you have any questions, if you'd like more details about certain aspects of this budget, you've got my email right there. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. So thank you very much, and turning it over to my colleague Karen Moore, our Senior Advisor for Atlantic Canada.
Thanks so much, JF, and welcome to all of you. I'm Karen Moores. I'm the Atlantic Region Senior Advisor for the Council, and want to recap a breakdown of our 4 Atlantic Canadian budgets. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, we saw a tremendous investment over the next decade in transforming a healthcare system. Just to remind you all, that healthcare system was world news recently for quite a serious cyber attack. So we look forward to seeing, again, to JF's point, the devil in the details on what the transformation and connectivity improvements for the Newfoundland and Labrador healthcare transformation will be. Really interesting as well, there's been a lot of talk about productivity in healthcare in Newfoundland and Labrador. There is a rollout of a new app coming, government spending $5 million committed in this budget to roll that app out. It's to connect patients directly to their healthcare system, their data. Again, we look forward to the details, but see this as a really positive step forward. Lastly, not a huge innovation budget, despite being a government that under Andrew Furey and his predecessors have spent a lot of time and money thinking about transitioning from oil and gas in different ways, thinking about innovation, working with startups and scale-ups. There was 11 million committed for this transition fund. There was just over 13 million committed for the Innovation and Business Development Fund. We applaud that, but also look back to key points that I use as metrics of success in Atlantic Canada. Are we doing enough for productivity? Are we doing enough for growth and scale for Atlantic Canadian companies? And are we doing enough for procurement? Moving into Prince Edward Island, very much a healthcare budget, less an innovation budget. $50 million is a lot of money on Prince Edward Island. They've earmarked $50 million to change healthcare delivery and $10 million to improve access to primary care. Again, we'd love to see more talk of smarter procurement in PEI. We'd love to see more talk about productivity for our innovators. Moving into Nova Scotia, where I would argue we had the most balanced budget, balanced not in terms of numbers, but balanced in terms of commitment to our innovation economy. They are spending over $70 million to build a one-person, one-record system to digitally support patient care. They have allocated over $5 million for their cybersecurity plan. And then what I loved most about this budget was their money for the innovation rebate program. This is money that Premier Houston and his team see as smart to spend on productivity, sustainability, and competitiveness. I look back to my metric points and go, Nova Scotia perhaps hitting in many ways those productivity pieces. Would still love to see more in this year of procurement, around procurement. And then lastly, in Nova Scotia, clearly the biggest news story is that in the province's history, they have never spent as much money as they are spending this year on the delivery of healthcare. So we look and hope and we'll work, of course, hard on behalf of our members to advocate for smarter procurement choices and policy choices that make us all much more productive as innovators. Over to you, Dana, to go into the Q&A.
Thank you, everybody. That was great. And I know it's a lot to take the time out of everybody's day who's come in to join us. I think at one point we had almost 300 people on the call. So we've got about 9 minutes left here. I have a couple of questions. We're trying to answer as many as possible through the chat, but if you're listening and you have questions for anybody that are going on right now, please feel free to connect. I'm just going to throw one quick question at my colleague Karen, and then we'll probably start to tackle some of the capital gains questions that have been thrown in. So Karen, the Atlantic region seems to have a common thread of healthcare. There's a little bit of clean tech and ag tech or agriculture tech that has been sort of sprinkled in there. And this is really around the cost of living measures. Do you think the region should do more or could do more for innovators, entrepreneurs, and owners across the region?
I think absolutely. And I'd just like to pinpoint a piece of work that my colleagues Laurent and Nick have worked really hard on, which is the Atlantic Investment Incentive Pilot. We have been advocating hard for this. We see it as a piece that would really set the stage for great innovation and productivity and flow of capital in the region. Anyone on this call who'd like to talk about the Atlantic Investment Incentive, I'd welcome your call, your support, and a conversation. But absolutely, we can always do more. But predominantly, that federal provincial initiative, we've pitched with some great entrepreneurs. And second to that, I think we all need to have smarter, swifter action on procurement that could deliver a lot more. So back to you. Thanks so much, Dana.
Thanks, Karen. A really great reminder to the folks online this year that it is the year of procurement. And CCI will have more to say about that in the coming weeks with maybe a new report with some economic metrics attached to it. So listen, we've got 8 minutes left. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. There's been a lot of activity in the chat. Thank you so much for all of your engagement. It's been exciting to see. And I think what we're going to do now is punt the conversation a little bit to the capital gains piece. So first question is around Nick. There's been some questions about other political engagement around the capital gains. Can you just talk a little bit about what we're doing in outreach across the lines?
Sure. I'll keep it quick just to get to more questions, but the short answer is this. We are a nonpartisan organization, so we work and speak with anyone who believes in Canadian innovation. So when it comes to this issue with capital gains, yes, we are speaking with all parties. We're speaking with the public service across the board. And fundamentally, what we're advocating for is a more innovative, productive economy, which is an all-party issue. It's a no-brainer. So we're keen to get more understanding of where the other parties stand in terms of their views. And we will have more awareness of that in the coming days. But for now, yes, we're very much engaged here in Ottawa and across the country on this.
Thanks, Nick. Ben, back in the hot seat.
Yes.
A couple of questions. There's been a lot of activity in the chat, so just trying to summarize and making best use of our time here. In your view, why do you think the government did this? And if there is a notch of victory or a path to victory, what does that victory look like?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple pieces here. I think, first, the government has struggled to grow the economy over the last 8 years and continued to increase spending. And so that spending has to be paid for somehow. And the only people that can increasingly be taxed are those that are generating, prosperity. So I think this tax is being implemented because the government is unable to grow the economy in order to pay for the social programs that it's committed to doing so. And so this is where it's ultimately being rested at. I think it ties into a political narrative as well, very much wanting to focus on, who's a group of people that we can try and sort of lionize and demonize around an issue in order to try and attract votes. And I think that you see that in the way that it's being debated, by the Prime Minister using it at different events within the last 24 hours and trying to make it around a fairness narrative. And so I think it's a deflection of their inability to grow the economy, their inability to create prosperity and to deliver on it. And so I think that's kind of how we find ourselves on this particular area. I think the government doesn't understand, though, the ramifications of what it means to invest in Canada and what it means not only just for founders and investors of technology companies, but also those who go and work at them. If you are a highly skilled worker, going and working at a startup and taking a tremendous amount of risk is no longer going to be necessarily an option that will yield the same type of return that it did previously. So I think we've got some real education that we've got to do with this government to help them understand it. And that's why collectively coming together and organizing matters. Now, the next question you asked is, what is victory, right? We've actually been in this position a couple of times now with this federal government. Back in 2016-15, when the Council of Canadian Innovators was started, the government wanted to implement some stock option changes, which would have made it really punitive to keep and retain talent here in Canada. And so folks got together, they engaged with the political class, they engaged with then Minister Morneau. It's good to see him come out on the side of innovators more recently in his public statements. So good to see that some of the former Liberals have seen the light in terms of some of their decision making. But we've got to organize. And so we've got to come together. As I mentioned, we did this previously in 2015-16 around the stock options. But we also did it again in the 2019-2020 budget, when the government again wanted to bring back stock options that would have impacted domestic firms. We were able to get a carve out then. So the first piece here really is, how do we organize collectively? We've all been caught off guard by this government's decision. And so now we quickly have to get together, figure out what solutions are, and then fight like hell to really try and animate and help people understand that this policy doesn't just impact the small group of people that they're trying to communicate that it does, but it will actually ripple out all across Canada in terms of who gets hired, what types of jobs these people are getting, and how we actually, create a prosperous and wealthy society that we want to. So, victory for us is not just really about this capital gains piece. It's about fundamentally helping the government understand that we collectively have to work together to build an innovation strategy. We've got to build policies that help our companies and help Canadians succeed, rather than having to go to sort of the lowest common denominator of taxing an ever piece of pie that is getting smaller. So, that for us is what victory looks like.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And I just want to give a shout out to all my teammates across the country for their in-depth analysis and advice today. As you know, and I mentioned before, all of our email addresses are available on our website. So please feel free to reach out if you have any more specific questions relevant to your companies. It is post lunchtime for many of us, and I'm sure bellies are grumbling. So just wanted to say thank you again for taking the time to support us by being here with your time. We continue the fight for Canadian prosperity, as Ben mentioned, and a big part of this is rowing together and linking arms to work and build a great country that we all want to live in. So thanks again to everybody. Just as we started at 59, we're going to end at 59, giving everybody a full rounded hour, and appreciate your time and appreciate my colleagues' time, and wishing everybody a great afternoon. Thank you.